Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Hey Sister. Well, hey, sister, how you doing?
Well, hello, sister. Happy Resurrection Sunday to you.
Happy Resurrection Sunday to you. Thank you so very much. Hello, Sister Deloria. How are you?
I am amazing. How are you, ladies?
We are doing fantastic.
Good.
We are excited to have you with us today. Yes, Jody's tuning in. She says, "Hey sisters, hey Deloria, hey Dor, hey Jody. Thank you so much for tuning in with us live this evening. If you are watching live, we want to make sure that you join the conversation in the comments. Like, follow, share, subscribe, and also check out our website so you'll never miss an episode of Hey Sister, and you can tune in wherever you are. Yes. The queen of DEI, she says. Well, we're going to get into an introduction of Deloria, and you'll know why she is with us today. We are talking about, in general, the attack on DEI tonight. But before we do that, we got to do in typical Hey Sister fashion. We got to talk about some hot topics. And I just want to talk about this hot topic because, since you've had an experience, I'm sure you've had an experience, Deloria. Many other you out there may have had an experience, but we just want to know what happened to excuse me. What happened to people being polite and just saying, "Excuse me, can I reach over you? Excuse me, can I walk past? Excuse me, I'm trying to get to this on the aisle," whatever it may be. I had a situation yesterday in a grocery store where I was standing there and I was talking to a friend and I was in front debating over which shredded cheese we needed to buy, and we were going back and forth. And these two people were standing there, and I didn't know if they were with each other, talking to each other, and what have you. And I guess when my friend kind of recognized, oh, maybe they're trying to get where you are, she was like, okay, they're trying to get there. So I slid down. And
Right.
this woman, um, of another hue, I'll say it as that because she's a human being, and she's like, well, please don't take offense, but when will you move so the rest of us would like to finish our shopping too, something to that nature. And I was like, well, ma'am, while you might not think you're offensive, you are very, it is received with offense. So thank you. Well, even your friend, when you were talking to your friend, and even I said yes. And when my friend made note to me that someone was waiting, I slid down. So you had ample opportunity to get in where you needed to, go around, do whatever. And, I just was like, well, what happened to, excuse me, can I get in here? Or excuse me, I'm trying to reach here. Have you ever had a situation like this where people, especially people of a different hue, ethnic background, or kind of lived experience, have a difficulty just saying, excuse me?
I personally had the experience too many times to count, actually. And I think,
Is it because we were raised that way culturally?
yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think that fortunately or unfortunately, I guess it depends on how you look at it. We have been conditioned almost to step to the side, to say excuse me, to lower our eyes. I recently saw the movie, the I forgot this, the Magical Negro Story. I can't remember the full title right now, and the American Society of the Magical Negro. And that's actually how the story opens, where he's like dodging, oh, excuse me, I'm sorry, excuse me. And we've been so conditioned um, in that way to say, excuse me, I'm sorry, stepping out of the way, again, lowering our eyes, cowering, even, for folks like myself who are relatively tall, cowering even when we walk into a room, as not to offend or scare or what have you. And it's exhausting. It is very easy. Like, I've literally been on an aisle, and just the other day, and a woman was standing right next to me. And I just was like, girl, if you just say, excuse me, I would move out of the way. But because you're not going to say, excuse me, I'm not going to move. Like, I can wait you out.
Standoff.
And then when I finally left, then she got what she needed. And I'm like my mother now. I talk out loud so people can hear me. I'm like, girl, you could have just said, excuse me. And I do that to children too, because everybody can do it at this point.
Well, we have a comment here. It says, I have. The other Hugh just don't want to feel like they have to ask you for anything. Perhaps that's it. Sherry, she said, hello, sisters. Hey, Sherry, how you doing? So, Deloria, what about you? Have you had this experience, and or are we making too much of it?
I think in some variation I have. And I think some of it is, I don't know if it's not wanting to ask. Some of it really is home training, and that they don't necessarily have to, or they just want to wait. But it feels to me weird to wait. If I'm trying to get by, I'm just excuse me, and I'm moving as I'm saying excuse me, right?
Right.
But there is some entitlement. I'll tell you, it's a funny story to me. I was at Planet Fitness in the little circuit training area where you go to each machine and it has the lights so long.
Yes.
And sometimes people want to do it out of turn. Now,
yes,
I'm a pretty laid back kind of chick. So doing it out of turn isn't phasing me until you messing up my routine, because I don't really want to be there, but I'm trying real hard to stay committed.
Me and my sister have experienced that at Planet Fitness together.
Exactly. So I'm in the area and there are two people that are doing it all out of sync. And I kind of noticed it, but I was like, well, they haven't blocked me yet. I'm not going to worry about it. One was of the same hue, since we're using that, and the other was of a different hue. So I kind of waited and waited. Then I was kind of like, nah, they're getting on my nerves. So it's right out by the front desk. I go and tell them. So two of them come out and they tell the person, the gentleman that was of the same hue, he said, oh, I'm sorry, whatever. And then they tell the woman of a different hue, like, hey, and she was like, well, I'm timing it. I'm seeing it on my watch. My watch has the right time. And I just was a fool today. I said, if you just followed the rules. Oh, no, she said, you just should have asked. I said, if you followed the rules, I wouldn't have to ask.
Right, because they have a whole like light.
Right, and that's what the guy, but she literally was trying to explain why her watch and her time, no ma'am. So, I just think it's different. I think some of it is in their own way, believe it or not, and I'm an optimist, maybe trying to be polite and wait it out, but that's kind of dumb. I don't even know if it's just dumb. If you're trying to get somewhere, just say it. So I think some of it could be they don't want to start something, but it's not just say, excuse me, so I'll move, because I'm not aware. But I have noticed how they'll just wait and wait and wait. Girl, okay, you may wait all day. Just say, excuse me, I'm trying to get to this, and we'll move along. So I don't know, but it just depends on the mood I'm in. Most of the time I'm pretty gracious, but every now and then I'm just like,
ain't nobody got time for that.
No, maybe we should just start asking. Maybe just so that I can be fair, I should say, so now, were you waiting because you just don't want to say excuse me, or were you waiting because you actually feel like it's impolite to ask me or to say excuse me or to move around or something like that?
I do think that's some of it. They don't want to seem like they're bogarting, so they'll just wait. But it's like, how long are you going to wait? Because I'm not that patient. That's probably why I say excuse me, because I'm trying to move along and do what I'm doing.
Well, we were always trained that excuse me is a polite thing to do. I mean, we also always trained, it's been very different because we've lived away from home longer than we've lived at home at this point. But if you're a Southern Louisiana, you say good morning, you say hello, how you doing to everyone. When you walk into a room and other people are already present, you greet the people in that room.
Right. Oh yeah.
They don't have to greet you because they already there. You showing up, so you greet them. And it's like
my kids this morning though, they're not as Southern as they should be, especially my boys. They're not. They're so laid back. They'll just walk in. I'm like, did y'all speak?
Right. Okay. I don't know. Yes. I don't know. Jody says, I just politely say, excuse me. Yes, honey. I don't know. Well, we're going to have to talk about this home training a little bit later. Um, Another hot topic that we wanted to talk about was the Tennessee State University board was vacated by the governor of Tennessee, and then a new board was put in place. We know that Tennessee State University is a historically Black institution. It had been under some investigation. They said some of their policies and practices, there were some things that needed to be updated or fixed, but there were no financial misfeasance, and they vacated the board anyway. Now, people are upset because initially it was thought it might be one or two board members, but the entire board was vacated. The president is retiring in June, so they feel like they've been left rudderless. Tennessee State is an institution that's a storied institution. It's the alma mater of one Miss Oprah Winfrey. And so, what do you think about this? To me, it's related to our conversation today about the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But what do you think about this decision and what it might mean and foretell for other institutions?
Well, who would you like to start?
Either one of y'all, come on, say something.
So I think it's so without knowing anything more than what I've read, I think it's egregious when a group of lawmakers go to their job and then a governor shows up and suggests that an entire board, a system board for an HBCU, a board of a university that has been traditionally underfunded by the state of Tennessee to the tune of about $2 billion. I think it's egregious for that governor to decide to vacate the entire board without there being at least a conversation. I think there were enough lawmakers there who have relationship to Tennessee State University that would have suggested that they should not have been blindsided in that way.
Mm-hmm.
They came in saying that they thought that, again, two, maybe three people were going to be removed, for the entire board to be removed, and have a president who will be resigning or officially out of office in June. That does put them in limbo. And there was a comment, and I'll have to find the exact quote by one of the lawmakers that suggested that this was just a matter of personalities being swapped out, if you will, and that it was for the betterment of the university. But for me, it's a question. If it's for the betterment of the university, then let's talk some real reparations here. Let's not play games. Like, switching out the board is not for the betterment of the university. Giving them their money, like running them their coins that you have traditionally deprived them of. That's some reparations. That's some real, you care about the school, you care about the betterment of the university, run them their coins.
Give them their $2.8 billion, which the president has been vocal about and spoke before Congress about, and other of the land grant institutions. We'd have to go find the article. I think it was Washington Post, New York Times, one of those newspapers of record did the article on the underfunding of land grant institutions, land grant historically Black colleges and universities versus their white counterparts. So for those of you in Louisiana, that would be the underfunding of Southern University versus the overfunding of a Louisiana State University. And when you go to these schools, or the University of Tennessee versus Tennessee State University, who both reside in the same city, and then you go to these institutions and you see the conditions. We know that Mississippi, they were sued, and that's why we saw a lot of the improvements.
And I'm sorry, I just want to say that here it is. It says, after the vote, House Majority Leader William Lamberth tried to downplay the new law. Quote, "All we're talking about is the board," he said. "It's vacating some personalities and bringing others in. The goal is to make TSU successful." So again, if you want to make it successful,
it's just the
run
unmitigated
them
gall.
those
Yeah.
coins.
It's the disrespect too. My grandmother would say the unmitigated gall.
Mm-hmm.
But they've gotten a lot of
Yes.
examples of people that do, but you know how some people say because I could, like, you know, somebody tried when they did something, you like, why did you do that? Because I could. And that's what it feels like, right? As opposed to just having the respective conversation, getting people's opinion, what is the impact? And even if you aren't trying to destroy it, what is the perception, right? Because the perception matters, all of those things. And it doesn't appear that any of those were taken into consideration. And it's just dismissive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Absolutely.
what I think we have to be careful of, because a lot of this, because I can, a lot of people are just doing things with no sense of consequence. And I think we need to figure out what are the consequences, right? Are we going to show up on, you know, his doorstep? How many people are going to be outside of, you know, the governor's mansion or outside of where he works saying the way you did that was inappropriate? And I think we're going to have to start doing that more. I'm a little concerned that we've been lulled into a sense of complacency because a lot of craziness has been
Yes.
happening, and people are like, la 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 la. What are you having for lunch today?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely agree.
Yeah, let's jump in because that's it. The lulled into complacency. I don't know.
Well, and that, what we saw it happen here in the state of Florida, it happened at another college. It was not a historically black college, but we saw what happened in the state of Florida where, a crony was appointed the president. They vacated the board. Is this new college of Florida Liberal Arts College. And to me, that is the test run of what they want to do at some other institution. So, like you said, don't be lulled in complacency. You need to see what they're doing and follow the blueprint and the script, because that's the test run. Because
Mhm.
when you can appoint whoever you want on the board, when the state can, then the governor has the power to appoint who they want. Yeah, we're gonna go on. Well, let's introduce our speaker for today. We have Deloria, as you can see her name there.
All of
She,
those names that came from Facebook. I don't use all of those, but I do use like 3 out of 4.
yeah, well, Deloria Stewart Nelson Street. She is the president, founder, and lead practitioner at Authentic Culture and Engagement Solutions, also known as ACE Solutions. She has years of experience in human resources, which brought her into this work. And as an entrepreneur, she is advancing these conversations about culture and engagement in our workplace, which diversity, equity, and inclusion is a part of. How do we create workspaces that have authentic culture and engagement for its employees? I think I did a good job with that, but
I think you did great.
all right. Well, we would love for you just to tell us your story about your experience and how you got into this work um, around diversity.
Sure, sure. So I've been doing HR work for probably 30 years. And I'll be honest, initially as the black girl, I was always thrown into DEI before it was even popular, right? I remember I worked for a manufacturing company. This was probably 20 years ago. It was probably during the Final Four. Some supervisor backed up on his mic and the mic was open and he referred to the black guys as the N word. And it was like, ugh. So they were like, D, can you fly to North Carolina and do some kind of session on? And I'm like, what? I
Mhm.
mean, there was no planning, no thought. It was just reactive. Now I'm thinking, really? Because I work for the tobacco company. So when I went to North Carolina, it was like I went back 30 years. All the supervisors were white, all the subordinates were black. It was like a very old fashioned manufacturing facility. People kept their head down. I was like, what in the heck is this? But you know, it was my job. I went, did some kind of session. Of course, it didn't work because it wasn't real. But I found myself pulled into that stuff a lot just because I was the one of a different hue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to be careful because one of the things I noticed during the whole uprising of DEI, people with no formal experience, no HR training, and no DEI training were given all these great opportunities just because they were black. And a lot of it blew up in our face. Now, don't get me wrong. There's certain experience you have being black, but understanding how to maneuver people, how to de-escalate things is more than just your hue. So I did those few things, but I still really wasn't a DEI practitioner. I primarily did employee relations. So I was the person that did a lot of workplace investigations, of helping with the collective bargaining agreement. I worked in some union environments. So all of this other stuff. But in doing employee relations investigations, I got to see the ugliness, whether it was discrimination or sexual harassment or LGBTQ. And I was always, I won't say shocked, because it wasn't shocking, but I really believe that 80% of it was, I'm just ignorant because I don't understand your culture, right? I've not been exposed to your culture. A lot of it, I believed, was unconscious bias, right? If I've never met a Black person or a Hispanic person and I don't have a relationship with them, all I know is what I read and see on TV, and we know how biased that is. And so when I meet you for the first time, I'm pulling all this data out of the box that's not real, and I'm interacting with you that way. So I would say 80% of the cases, the people were just ignorant, didn't know any better. There was 20% of people that were just downright bigots, but I feel like people like that always get called out, with the exception of the president. But that's a whole nother story, right? I mean, they don't last, and they end up being terminated. But I just started being a little more curious about, what if we did more proactive training, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if we started teaching people about different cultures and quit making it a secret and quit saying that we were colorblind? And so, in all honesty, that's what got me interested toward making the shift, because I saw the results of what happened when people didn't have the exposure or understand other cultures. And there were these big, ugly investigations, sometimes lawsuits, arbitration, EEOC charges. And I really felt like a lot of it would be reduced if people just had the opportunity to learn. And so that was my impetus for wanting to change sides, for lack of a better description.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, ignorance is curable, because that just means you have a
Absolutely.
lack of knowledge.
That
Ignorance
part.
is curable. Stupidity is
Absolutely.
not. And so I'm going to ride with you and say 80% is ignorance, but that 20% of stupidity, boy, it is. It's hard to fight against. I tell you
I
that.
agree.
But
I
would
agree.
you do us a favor? Would you define in your words DEI? Obviously, DEI is an acronym. It's
Sure.
being used as an adjective to modify pronouns at this point, it seems, out here in the social media sphere, or with some people who are being reckless with their words.
Oh, yeah.
um but how do you define DEI?
Sure. Sure. DEI or either DEIB. Diversity is really more like representation, right? We're all different. Do you have enough? I remember you had this one, crayons. So do you have this box of crayons and you got all the different colors, right?
Yep.
Truly, diversity is about representation. Everybody come and be different. Let's not have a box of all brown crayons or a box of all white. So it
Hmm.
really is numbers. What is represented? Equity is, are you having equitable opportunities, equitable pay, equitable promotions? And equity and equality are very different. And people love to jump on that. I just want everything equal. Well, if we tell ourselves the truth about where people stop and start in the opportunities based on the historic discrimination, saying it's all equal after you've been pushing me back for 80 years isn't equal, right? Because just like that justice walk, we're not starting in the same place. So equity says, I'm going to make the modifications necessary so that we all are on the same playing field. And that may mean, if I've been historically paid 20% less, I'm going to do an equity analysis of the pay and go, oh, wow, you have your master's and this many years of experience, yet you're 20% underpaid. I'm going to give you 20%, right? So
Hmm.
that's equity, not equality. And so equity is huge, to be honest, but that's what people fear from my perspective. People are really comfortable talking about diversity. They're somewhat comfortable talking about inclusion. Belonging sounds good. It reminds us of, we waiting to get picked for the kickball team or the soccer team, and they pick you, so now you belong. It's the equity that I think people fear, because, and this is just my opinion, there are some people that aren't interested in equity. They're interested in supremacy and maintaining a social order that keeps them on top. And
Mm-hmm.
you see that in some of the decisions because they'll say, oh, yeah, this. But then when you talk about equity, and even attorneys, a lot of labor attorneys are like, they don't even want to run the equity analysis because, once you know, then you're almost responsible to do something about it. So sometimes they dodge around it because they could maybe say they don't know and they may address the people that are speaking out. But if they actually, I think Salesforce actually did it. It was one of the groups that said, no, let's look at this. And when they looked at how inequitable the pay was, they fixed it. But very
Mm-hmm.
few companies are that committed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I remember working in the pharmaceutical industry and being a beneficiary of one of those um equity analysis
Mhm.
of pay analysis. And then when President Obama was in office and they passed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, I remember our organization doing another one of those salary equity analysis, and all of the women in the workplace getting our salaries adjusted.
Exactly.
And if an institution is brave enough to do an equity analysis, it is very telling. And then if they're committed to doing the work to create equity, as you said, also in opportunities,
Hmm.
and see, because what's crazy to me is that at this point, women are 51% of the population in the United States of America. We are nowhere near even 50% of the leaders
Oh, yeah.
in politics and corporations. Um, Shoot, not even in church leadership.
Right.
But we 51% of the population. Let that sink in for y'all for a second.
Misogyny is almost as bad as racism. I mean, if you think about a lot of what's happened, I mean, we going back to Hillary Clinton, and people can have their reasons, but a lot of even our Black brothers crossed over for misogynistic reasons because they didn't want a woman leading them or leading the country.
Absolutely. We got a comment here. It says that yes, I benefited from equity analysis in my last 2 years of tenure
Oh, yeah.
from Joe Lindy. So yeah, we know that it's definitely a real thing. Sister, do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I will say I too benefited from that situation where there was a an EEOC inquiry that took place. And I hadn't been at the company at that point but a year. And so the year that I started, which I started in March of 2017, I'm sorry, but those few months that I was there in 2017, that was the end period, I think, of an adjustment. And so one day I got a check out of the blue, and but the interesting part of it was that we're not admitting any faults. We're not admitting that there was any inequities, but we went through this investigation with the EEOC, and so we're going to pay this money. And so the interesting thing is what I've since found, I guess, interesting is, you get a check and you're made to be on par with, I guess, the folks in your pay grade, right? Um, of a different gender or a different hue. But the fact of the matter is, there are so many people who probably would have been promoted or had been in a different pay grade had all things been equal.
Oh,
So
yeah.
yes, you got a bump in pay because you were being, if you were at whatever grade level you were at, you were being brought up to standard to
Right.
that pay grade. But it doesn't necessarily fix the fact that you probably were denied opportunities to move up.
I agree.
Mhm.
And they've changed some of the laws to try to help as far as asking people what they make. Because what we have found out is if you were underpaid by 20%, you stay underpaid. Because in the past, the recruiter's practice was, hey, what are you currently making? You tell them what you're currently making, they may add 5 or 10%. But in a lot of cases, we were 20 or 30% under. So I
Mhm.
know Boston, California, some places in New York have done it. Some companies that work nationally, went ahead and changed it, because you imagine as a recruiter saying, okay, I can ask in Florida because we don't protect nothing, but I can't ask in Boston, and I can't. So a lot of times they don't ask as much now, but we have to figure it out. And the other thing, to your point, I benefited once, but they wouldn't even tell me why. Now, I work in HR, so I knew why, but it was just one day my boss was like, hey, we decided to give you a raise. You've been doing a good job. And I thought, bull, beep, beep, beep. but thank you. You know what I mean? Because how many times do you figure out? The other thing is, and it's funny, at the Women on the Rise March meeting, Lachey Reeves was talking about pay equity and negotiating more pay. And I remember my coworker had left his pay stub on the copy machine. It was during tax season. I guess he was working on taxes. And so I was like, but what was so interesting is, how they have pay grades, and sometimes they have 3 or 4 different roles buried in the pay grade.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like an employee relations supervisor. And I didn't realize there was an employee relations supervisor 1 and employee relations supervisor 2, because it was kind of hidden in the pay grade. But so I didn't say the guy's name. I just said, hey, how can I be an employee relations supervisor 1 and supervisor 2? And what's all this? And and so then, of course, I got promoted again. But, it's always us having to do the detective work. But equity is huge. But to your point, if it's only equity and pay at one level, and it's not equity and promotional opportunities, similar to reparations, you stay further and further behind. So although you brought me up here, what about the raise? What about the promotions? And then red circling salaries and stuff. I used to get so frustrated. I remember a situation. There was a young lady who, she was actually an attorney, but a lot of times you just want to get a good job. So she had taken a job at a much lower level. She interviewed for a director role and they loved her. But then they started saying, yeah, but she's so low. We don't want to bring her up to a director. Can we bring her in as a manager? I'm like, she applied for the director position. Yeah, but that'd be such a big jump. I mean, and this stuff, these practices, whether you know it or not, they happen all the time. And they decide to give you a certain amount, but they don't want to give you too much. Pay me what the job is worth. And that's what's happening. And that's equitable. And they wouldn't do it. I mean, I stood on my head and they, oh yeah, that's true. And so you'd be surprised that even when people are called to the carpet, this big jump sometimes makes it hard. And I agree with Jody. They says that's why, yeah. And then that's why sometimes you have to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, and it's buried. And a lot of times you don't know because the outward facing title is the same.
Well, it feels like, from at least in my experience, you often have to leave. I know a few years back, when I worked for a different company, that a group of us, we just, we weren't in HR, so we could only run our own scientific analysis. But we just were like, how many of us have graduate degrees? And almost every single Black person in the organization had a graduate degree, which was not the case for every white person in the organization. And it was the fact that, we're running, it's not science, a scientific analysis, but we almost certainly have to leave the company in order to get a pay raise, and sometimes to come back to that very company.
Sure.
But in order to get a pay raise, when very often our white male counterparts, for example, don't have to do that. And so then they also get the opportunity for tenure and for other benefits that come along with being at the same company for many years.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that some more. What does the data show? So with DEI, what does the data show? What does the data show in organization? Well, some of the data that we know for sure, we know that Black women, for instance, are overeducated in corporate spaces. If you, and we continue, and our other brown sisters, Latina sisters, they're also, educational attainment is starting to rise and increase. So we're seeing the rise and increase in educational attainment. We're seeing the rise and increase in the experiences. But then
it doesn't match the money, though. I'm not a proponent of.
Yes.
It doesn't match.
It doesn't match the money. That's what I want to know. Why?
The money.
But why?
Gives us more debt.
Yes, come on with it. Say, come on, speak on it.
Yeah, Because we've always been trained that we have to run faster, jump higher, right? And our parents told us that, right? My mom had her PhD and she's like, why? Because she never really got the money's worth from having it. And so I get the why and I understand the pushing and it sounds good, but I think it's because we always had all of these hurdles to clear that other people didn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to your point, I've had a master's degree for roles that I found out other people didn't even have a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
And it would happen so innocuously. They say, oh, I'm in school. And I'd be like, girl, what you getting your master's in? And they'd have this blank deer light stare, only to find out that they were trying to get their bachelor's degree, right? So we are overeducated, overworked, right? We get all these big projects, but the pay isn't there. Now, here's some of the good news. I think it's getting better now because we have more access to information, right? In the past, before the internet, Glassdoor, and all this stuff, we didn't know, right? So I remember when I started working for Brown and Williamson Tobacco Corporation, it was a nice raise compared to where I was. It was like my second job in HR, only to find out there that they paid so much. The forklift operators were making $30 an hour 10 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, this big raise isn't looking so good. The other thing is, we need to talk about how much we make. I talked about this in the meeting. The National Labor Standards Act gives everybody the right to talk about pay and benefits. People dissuade you and say, oh, it's not a good idea for them because you're going to find out. But it's a damn good idea for you to talk about your pay, especially with people that are close to you, so you should know. The other thing I'm saying, as sisters, there was someone that was open and there was a position she was leaving. So I said, well, how much was the position paying? And she was kind of, well, I don't know. And I said, look, we are working on equity, and you being hesitant about sharing your income is going to make it harder for the sister coming in. Stop this foolishness. Stop this. Well, it took me 10 years to get there. Sorry for you, but I don't want my kids waiting 10 years to get the kind of money that some of these folk getting right out the gate. We need to talk about it, because if we talk about it and we do our research, we're better prepared and we can ask for it. So I think pay equity is improving, but it's still not where it needs to be. But the more you know, the more you can negotiate, the more you talk about it, the more you set your expectations, the better it's going to get.
Yeah. Well, I dropped a couple articles in the links, and I really encourage people to go in. There's the women in the workplace
Oh,
and
yeah.
Black women in the
That's
workplace.
powerful.
These were done by McKinsey,
Yep.
one of the largest consulting organizations out there, in conjunction with the Lean In organization. And there is some very powerful data and statistics, illustrations, because to me, I think another reason why people are afraid of this, why, so that's the next question, like this attack on DEI, why now? Like, why is it all of a sudden? To me, it's they replace DEI, they replace CRT with DEI as the boogeyman right now. And I think it's largely because people are talking about what they feel and they're not dealing with facts.
Nope.
They're
At
not
all.
dealing with facts. They're not dealing with data. They're not dealing with information. Because if you confront the data and the information, then you can make knowledgeable and reasonable assessments. But if it's just about what you feel, well, what we feel, I mean, everybody has a different set of feelings. Everybody got a different set of beliefs and thoughts. But the data is what the data is, because I read this one article. Well, it was in the comment section about this in this article that I read. Well, they have so many, this is the person's word, so many Black women in high leadership roles. And I was like, so
Where?
many?
Yeah, where?
What's so many? So from your lived experience, you see one or two, and that's so many. Or you're on TikTok or something and you're seeing like, but that's so many. It's like, if you look at the data will show you it's not even representative of what we are in the population in this country.
Facts matter until it comes to this topic, right? I mean, I hate to say that because people say we need to look at the facts, but that's how propaganda works, right? You keep saying something long enough, some people believe it, even though it's not true. And that's what is happening. The whole CRT thing was bunk, and so is this, because even with all of the efforts, the movement has been very, very small. And I know that Lean In Workplace Black Women article, I mean, it just validated what we've always known, right? That even though we have the most education as well as drive, there was a really good article talking about drive. And they talked about how some white women was like, well, I don't really want that position. But black women are like, no, we want it. A lot of times we're single parents, we're the head of the household, we're the primary breadwinners. But even with that, they talked about black women having the least amount of support.
Mm-hmm.
So it's real and there's documented proof. But once again, some of it isn't about equity, it's about supremacy. And as hard as that is for some of us to swallow, we better, because the closer we get, the more they keep moving the goalposts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Last week we talked, well, not last, well, it was last week. It was on Thursday when we did our special show. We were talking about, the Baltimore Bridge incident and the tragedy that it was, and how this Florida congressperson, in the comments was like, DEI did this. There was another situation with the plane in the Alaska Airlines plane where they didn't have the bolts. And, a woman was flying that plane, and Elon Musk made a comment about, this was a DEI. DEI is the reason this is happening. We're waiting for a plane to fall out of the sky because of DEI. And it was just like, so it's like,
That's so ignorant. I mean, and it
Well,
has
and,
no
and then
fact.
DEI is now that it's didn't earn it.
earn it. Yes.
Oh, I never even heard that.
Yeah, this is
Yes.
the new, as the Baltimore mayor said, they don't have the courage to say the N word. So now it's the suggestion that you're a DEI hire, so you didn't earn it.
Well, and and I mean, we've worked in the workforce. I've not seen all of these unqualified black folk, Hispanic folk getting the jobs. What I see, and we just talked about it, overqualified, more experienced, more educated, more competent. I mean, I've never seen that. I've seen a lot of mediocre folk of a different hue get
Mm-hmm.
really, really high positions, but it's the propaganda and it's not factual at all. I haven't seen anybody that said, okay, well, they're black, let's just hire them. But we got to jump through hoops, have 10 interviews, other people had 3, have a master's degree, they barely got high school. Child, please.
Well, and I just dropped in an article because this says the Fortune 500 is making progress when it comes to black leadership. That's the good news. The bad news is only 8 Fortune 500 companies have a black CEO. That's just 1.6%, a far cry from black Americans' 14.4% share of the population. So again, I ask, where is all these blacks that they are talking
Taking
about
their
are
jobs,
in these
right? Yeah.
leadership
It's
positions
just propaganda. We know it's not real.
and taking jobs?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's not real. But they know it's not real, right? It's just that they keep saying it, right? They have access to these reports. So some of them now, I'd say the ones that are orchestrating it, because it is definitely planned and strategic. This is not happenstance. The folk that are planning it strategically to get people worked up, they know the facts. Unfortunately, a lot of their followers don't know and they don't research. They just listen to them and then they start telling other people. But the folk that are orchestrating it, they know darn well that it's as my grandma would say, it's a lie from the pit of hell.
Well, I think that, we talk about why
well,
now? Okay, go ahead, sister. Go ahead, sister.
no, I was just gonna say. So I was gonna say it's a lie from the pit of hell, but it is sadly and unfortunately a lie that is being perpetuated in the media, specifically during this political atmosphere where everything becomes it's back in the day they called it an affirmative action hire.
Right.
Then we did the whole attack on CRT, and now we're blaming everything bad that happens on DEI. I know, and and the collective of us knows that if we were so bad, you wouldn't have brought us here in the first place.
Hello.
If we were so bad, we wouldn't have been nursing your kids, caring for your kids, feeding you, cooking your food, cleaning your homes. If we were so bad, all of the things that we invented and didn't get credit for, we would not have done. I mean, if we were so bad, we would not still be dominating in every single possible sport there is. Like, if we were so bad, you would not constantly find yourself trying to emulate our style, our hair, our fashion, our everything else.
Girl,
So
don't get me
clearly
talking
we're
about them
not that
lips
bad.
injections. Woo.
But so then what is it then that we do? How do we combat these false narratives that are being put out there? Because at the end of the day, sadly, some people, they don't do their own investigation.
They don't.
Hmm. Well, I'm gonna ask. So that's one part. So that save that, and we want to hear your opinion about that, Deloria. Like, that part, what she just said. But I want to say this part, and then what do we do to not buy into the narrative?
Right.
Because I think when I get really kind of under my skin is when I hear um black people, um people who are um new new Americans or new visa holders in this country, and they are like, oh, well, they need to earn it. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you talking about, you just fled this country, you just fled Colombia and
Right.
Venezuela, and now you don't want to let nobody else from Colombia and Venezuela in. Wait a minute,
Right.
hold up, player. Like, how do then we not then buy into that same propaganda? Because when I hear it coming out of people who look like me out of our mouth, then I'm like, okay, what do we do? So those are questions for you, Miss Deloria.
It's a lot. You got to unpack it. Well, here's the reality. Bias is not just for white folk, right? Black people are biased against black people just like white people, right? Because we all heard the same information. And although it's not true, you hear it over and over when they do that of Harvard test, that bias test. It's shocking to people, but unless you have, well, let me stop. One of the things we have to do is positively prime our kids, right? We have to do the opposite. Man, you are so beautiful. That dark skin is so chocolate and pretty. That hair that they say is kinky, girl, is so strong and beautiful. We have to over prime because the world is priming people in the opposite way. And we have to start telling our kids how beautiful, how smart, how talented they are, so that when they start hearing these other things, they almost fall on deaf ear. I'll make you laugh. I think my kids thought of Cinderella was Brandy because we watched that version so much, right? So they didn't remember the blonde haired, blue eyed Cinderella that got the kiss. And so we have to be more diligent with that, and we have to start early. I remember one time this guy, he worked somewhere, he's a black guy, and his kids were so programmed. He said they saw, I think Michael Jordan at the time, and they said, Daddy, he has shoes like yours.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So that's one thing. We have to start that early. That's why the HBCU experience is so powerful, right? Because we're reinforcing your power, your ability to achieve, your ability to be great. So once you get out there in the world that's not like that and everybody's telling you the opposite, you've been fortified.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh,
You're a mute, sister.
and
You're
we
a
want to
mute,
hear it.
sister.
Yeah, because your
So
face looked like
sorry.
a hater.
So sorry. Speaking of that, the HBCU experience, how might these states that are attacking DEI, that are challenging DEI in public institutions, how might that impact potentially HBCUs that are publicly funded in states that have traditionally underfunded them, but somehow they are, you know,
It's a
how,
dangerous time.
how does the game change for them?
It's a dangerous time. I mean, if we follow the breadcrumbs, I mean, if they are saying that it's illegal to have benefits or whatever just for black people, they could easily say that HBCUs, just their existence, are a violation, right? I mean, we can't miss that, right? And we don't know if that's the plan. We got to stand up. We got to show up. We got to write letters. We got to vote. We need to wake the heck up before we don't even recognize where we are. Because I do think they're at risk, right? I mean, we can pretend, but just like he vacated that whole board, I mean, they are at risk. And, depending on the administration, they may try to fund it more. And, everybody was all excited when Madam Vice President was in. But that collective excitement, there's always a backlash, white lash, black lash, whatever. Whenever we move forward, it creates fear that we're getting too close, and then they start changing things around. So I do think they could be at risk. I think that's the only way we need to think in order for us to act. And there's a lot of HBCU graduates and alumni with power, but we can't just keep going to work and say, well, I got a good job, it's not impacting me, right? I think we need to be a lot more alarmed than we are.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the thing is, see, and that's why I put the laws change now. What? Because we also get into this about the law and things being legal.
Slavery was legal, so like you talked about,
There you go.
we got to go for what is just and fair. Just because they make a law doesn't mean that it's moral or just, and we got to have enough sense to push back
Yes.
against that. I mean, I'm a law-abiding citizen if the law makes sense. If it's not, then the hell with it, and I'm gonna push against it, right? Come on.
Yes. And that's why that's why I'm typing in the comments, because we have to push for what's moral and just, because just like those land grant institutions were created by laws that created them, and just because federal dollars might be put for a certain amount of federal dollars for HBCUs, if it comes down to your state and your state legislature decides to do something different because of how your state is moving, then where do those dollars go? And that's what we need to start asking the question. How do they have, if it comes down from the Department of Education, do they have the ability to divert them somewhere else or do something different with those dollars? Or divert them over to the majority institution, that's the land grant institution. Like, those are the questions and the things that we have to get smart and get savvy about.
I agree.
Because just because it's legal does not mean that it's moral, does not mean it's just, does not mean it's right.
Right.
And we see there's always unintended consequences to laws.
Yep.
Because
I would say that, so here in the state of Louisiana, for example, there's HBCU Day at the Capitol, right? And so a lot of the HBCUs were recently at the Louisiana State Capitol, and it's great. It's fun, right? You bring and look, I don't know all the details about exactly, what happened. I saw tables, I saw mascots, I saw legislators, but where I want us to get to, as you're saying, the potential for something to happen is there.
It is.
And let's be clear. My alma mater, for example, based on the report that came out a few years ago, was underfunded by the tune of about $1 billion in comparison to the land grant institution across 10 minutes away, known as Louisiana State University. And as a result, HBCUs have still been producing despite being highly underfunded. So just imagine if we got those funds, what we'd be able to do. And so I think that when we have our days at the Capitol, when we meet with lawmakers, and very often, let's be honest, the lawmakers that meet with us are the ones that look like us.
Right.
But when we have these opportunities, we have to make it very, very known that we have the power to galvanize. And I think that, unfortunately, here in the state of Louisiana, a large percentage of Black constituents have not gone out to vote in contests that have mattered. And as a result, we have lawmakers who will do things that are to the detriment to our HBCUs that are that receive public funding.
Yeah.
And HBCUs is just one example. But again, this whole diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation, because it has become code word for anything Black,
right,
or anything woman,
Mm-hmm.
there are far-reaching and unintended consequences, as you mentioned,
Or intended consequences, because I
or
think a lot of
intended.
it is, yeah, I think a lot of it is by design, but they put this at the headline, so you're like looking at this, but their goal is really something under the surface, so to speak. So it's definitely a lot more covert than overt, but the impact is the same.
Yeah. Well, so then what do we do now? And what do we do next? I mean, I think you started off, you gave us some really good example about what to do with our children and diligently feeding our kids positive messages. I believe in the books, like definitely feeding them kind of books and material that affirm them. But what do we do when we go, the people who are tuning in now live or who might watch this later in the broadcast and the replay, what do they do when they go to work tomorrow? Like, how do they show up in the workspace tomorrow?
Yeah. I think show up as yourself, but pay attention. Pay attention to who's getting promoted. Pay attention to who's getting the increases. And there is beauty in anonymous letters, right? A lot of people are like, I don't want to be retaliated against. And let me keep it real. I don't work for anybody now, so it's a lot easier to be even more real, but I've always been pretty authentic. Retaliation is real, right? And even though the EEOC puts it in there, and I would tell people, okay, there's a law against retaliation. The reason people are afraid to participate in investigations because it is real. But the beauty of an anonymous letter is it still has to be investigated, right? And the only thing that's anonymous is who put the complaint in, but you're going to clearly give the name and the infractions of the people. Do your research, start writing anonymous letters, right? Let multiple people write anonymous letters. Sometimes you got to send ish to the news. I mean, you have to let people know that you don't play. The other thing is, let's be selective with how we spend our dollars, right? What companies are we going to support when we hear about what they've done? Or what are we going to do with the University of Florida? I mean, if my son was the best football player alive and his dream had been to once play to be a Gator, brother, look, you better, that gator's gonna have to change into a different animal. So I think we have to use the power that we have. And I think that's the part. We have a lot of power, but a lot of times we forget that we have power. But power that's not used is almost non-existent. So we need to think through, we have to be strategic, right? You know, if it's something going on with a grocery store, let's boycott. Let's, put our money in the Black community. There's so many things, but a lot of times it's not, it is going to impact you. I don't remember the quote when they came for the folk and I didn't say anything. They came for these folk, I didn't say anything. And then they came for me and there was nobody around. We cannot just ignore these attacks. We have to be proactive. We could write letters. We can talk about where you're taking this away, but there's only so many percentages of us. Document, do the research. In certain states, you have public laws that you can get records from people. The EEOC has a press release. I mean, there's a lot. It's a funny thing. My best friend actually works for the EEOC. She lives in Louisiana, so we always laugh. I'm trying to get her to come work for me when she retires. But she was saying the stuff that she sees is crazy. And she goes in there and it does not play at all. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that we would think stopped 20, 30 years ago, the discrimination in these jobs and how they treat people. I mean, if you think about it, not only is the guy running Tesla has so many EEOC suits, so many of their factories that are having blatant discrimination against Black people. That'll make me never want to drive a Tesla.
Never, ever,
Ever, ever.
ever, ever. That's right. They
But
got
too many people still want to drive them. So I don't know why.
no.
Just like too many kids still want to play for these quote unquote Division I big
Power
universities,
Five schools.
Power
Yeah.
Five schools, etc. And I'm afraid that their parents are not having these conversations because we have Kentucky, we have Florida, we have Alabama, we have Oklahoma. Those states in and of themselves have huge football programs. And if Black kids said, "I'm not going,"
right,
that would
change
change
their tune, right? They would, but let's be real. Some of their parents don't know, right? So
right.
we have to educate parents too, right? We can't just say they should know better, because you got to sometimes do a lot of research. I mean, a lot of times these kids are first generation college students.
Mm-hmm.
They may not know, and their parents may not know. So in addition to just being excited about their skill, we need to figure out ways to talk to their parents about the long-term prospects. Are they going to get their degree? Or are they just going to use them up until the eligibility runs out? A lot of these things, but it's nuanced conversations, and we can't be afraid of our own folk.
Yeah.
Some of us have gotten a little brand new ourselves, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's definitely a nuanced conversation, and it's one we have to continue to have more conversations about, because I definitely know your comment about we use the power we have and power not used is non-existent. Like, we have more power than we give ourselves credit for.
Absolutely.
And if we start moving in ways where we use our collective power, then we could change. Because there is one thing that will make people move and make people stop, and that's your dollars and your economic power.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna tell you how you spend your dollars, or where you put your eyeballs now, because your clicks and likes are currency.
Yep.
That matters. And so how then do we move and shift some things?
Right.
I think this was an insightful conversation. It got us a good start, and we can continue to have this conversation. Hopefully we can bring you back and bring some more people on to continue to discuss this and discuss some of the nuance. You mentioned the implicit bias test. I dropped it in the comments. So anybody interested in doing the Harvard implicit bias test, and it's on a lot of different things, so you can see where you have bias on a lot of different topics.
We all have it, so don't act like we do. It'll just
We all have bias. I have bias, and but the first step in change is acknowledgement. So
Amen.
That's all I have to say in closing. Sister, what you want to say in closing?
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully, like Demetria stated, this is the start of the conversation. There are many more conversations to be had, and hopefully, we can design some sort of toolkit or what have you to help people know how they can feel empowered enough to make a difference and take those first steps. Because I'll say myself, we have this platform, we use our platform. I think we use our platform for good, but at the same time, we don't have the same reach as somebody who has, a certain name or a certain popularity. And so I would hope that as we continue to see this diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation being, had, and efforts to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion being dismantled, that we will find ways to actually use more of our voices and our platforms to see change. Because one of the things, as Demetria asked about, what does the data show? What I know for sure is the data does not show us being on the same playing field.
No.
The data has yet to show us having the same pay, having the same rate of promotion, having the same, years of tenure before you get to the next level. The glass ceiling is a real thing. Many of us are still bumping up against it and not shattering through it. And this idea that we've gotten things and we haven't earned them. But on the flip side, you have folks who have a whole history of legacy. That they've gotten stuff just by virtue of who they are, by their last name. And it's not a problem. Like, it is absolutely a problem when you see people with my hue attain certain things and you say that they didn't deserve it, they didn't earn it, but yet you see your own children going to schools because you are an alum and you pay some money, and you see no problem with that. So I hope this is the beginning and not the end of the conversation.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything you want to say in closing, Deloria, before we end the evening?
I think we just got to be aware, pay attention to what's going on, and don't be afraid to act. The fear is palpable. I mean, I've worked with the people, I've done investigations, and the people were like, I'll just quit. And I'm like, write a statement. I mean, because just quitting doesn't always help. At least write the letter if you're going to leave anyway, and call out the folk that have done the things, right? So I just think the fear, and a lot of it is the personal fear. So what I would say is, it's sometimes the economic reality of your situation, but we have to work together collectively, right? It's the collaboration and the putting our power together and being strategic. We can make a lot of change. I mean, I worked at companies and I knew we could make a lot of change because we can make a lot of noise. Brands don't like to be damaged, but it's the fear. And sometimes, we got to get past the fear and make things better for the future generations.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, with that, I'm going to ask you ladies to hold the line as we wave and say goodbye and good night to everybody. Good night.